He thought the divorce had left her with nothing. He was wrong. If you're finding this story today, maybe it's because you've also had to start over from zero. If that's you, hit that subscribe button, because this is a community for people who know what it's like to rebuild. The air in the lawyer's office was the temperature of forgetting, not cold, not warm, just a sterile recycled neutrality that was supposed to soothe but only managed to erase. I sat in a leather chair that sighed every time I shifted my weight, the sound of a disappointed ghost. Outside, a persistent November rain washed the city down to its gray bones. On the polished mahogany table between me and Ms. Albright lay the final document, a stack of paper that represented the formal amputation of my life. My signature was the only thing missing. "Just here, Chloe," Ms. Albright said, her voice a careful, practiced calm. She pointed with a silver pen, its tip hovering over the line. I picked up the cheap plastic pen the office provided. The ink was black. It felt appropriate. For 2 years, my life had been a blur of legal jargon, financial disclosures, and the slow, methodical dismantling of a future I had once believed in. Mark, my soon-to-be ex-husband, had been brilliant at it. He moved through the process like a surgeon, precisely cutting away every shared asset, every joint account, every piece of furniture we'd picked out together on hopeful Saturday afternoons. He took the house we'd renovated, the car we'd taken road trips in, the savings I'd contributed to from my own salary before he'd convinced me to quit my job. He even took the dog. His lawyer argued that since he'd paid the adoption fee, Baxter was technically his asset. An asset, that's what it all came down to. I looked at the line. My hand was steady, which surprised me. I thought it would be shaking. But after 2 years of constant low-grade terror, all that was left was a profound and hollow exhaustion. There was nothing left to be afraid of. He had already taken everything. I signed my name. Chloe Sterling, the last time I would ever write that name. The ink bled slightly into the thick paper, a tiny, dark starburst. It was done. Miss Albright took the document, her movements efficient. She slid it into a folder, which she then placed into a briefcase with a decisive snap. "It's over," she said, offering a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was a good lawyer, pragmatic and sharp, but she dealt in dissolutions. She was an expert in endings. I nodded, unable to form words. The silence in the room was suddenly immense, a vacuum where a marriage used to be. The rain tapped against the window, a quiet, indifferent applause. I stood up, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. I had walked into this office as a wife, and I was walking out as, what, a legal stranger? A single woman with $50 in her checking account and a single suitcase of clothes in a friend's spare room. That was the sum total of my existence. "I'll have the final decree mailed to your new address," Ms. Albright said, walking me to the door. I gave her my friend's address, the words tasting like charity in my mouth. As I stepped out into the hallway, the scent of old paper and carpet cleaner replacing the sterile air of the office, she hesitated. "Chloe," she said, her professional mask slipping for just a second. "You're 28 years old. This isn't an end. It's just a very difficult chapter break." I tried to smile, but my face wouldn't cooperate. "Thank you for everything." I walked away without looking back. The sound of her office door clicking shut behind me like the final punctuation mark on a sentence I never wanted to read. The elevator ride down was silent. I stared at my reflection in the polished brass doors. A pale woman with tired eyes stared back. She looked unfamiliar, like a distant relative I'd only seen in photographs. That night, I slept for 10 hours, a deep, dreamless, leaden sleep. When I woke up, the world felt exactly the same and yet fundamentally altered. The finality hadn't brought relief, just a vast, empty quiet. The phone call came 3 days later. I was sitting on the floor of my friend's guest room, sorting through the meager contents of my suitcase, trying to decide what to keep and what to donate. Most of it felt like a costume from a play that had closed. "Chloe Sterling, please," a familiar voice said. It was Miss Albright. My heart seized. What now? Had he found some other way to punish me? Some forgotten debt to pin on my name? "This is Chloe," I said, my voice thin. I was Chloe Ward again. I had to remember that. "I have something unusual," she began, and I could hear the rustle of papers on her end. "I was closing out your file, doing a final audit of the asset declarations for archival purposes. It's just a formality, but I found something, an omission, or rather, something that was declared but overlooked." I held my breath. "What is it?" "A property, deed of trust. It was filed in your name, your maiden name, Chloe Ward, on your 18th birthday. A gift from your father, it seems. It was listed on the initial asset sheet, but its declared value was 0. It was filed as a derelict commercial property with significant tax arrears. Mark's lawyers must have seen it as a liability and ignored it. Frankly, So did I, my father. He had passed away 5 years ago, a sudden heart attack that had left a hole in my life I never quite knew how to fill. Our relationship had been complicated. He was a quiet, often distant man, a dreamer who'd been beaten down by life. I loved him, but I never felt like I truly knew him. A property, I repeated, my mind struggling to catch up. Where? A place called Northwood. Up in the mountains. It's an old cider mill, apparently, on about 10 acres of land. She paused. Chloe, I need to be clear. The documents describe it as being in a state of complete disrepair. The back taxes are several $1,000s. It's likely worth less than what's owed on it. But it is yours. Free and clear of the divorce settlement. He can't touch it. It was a premarital gift, and he either never knew about it or didn't care enough to investigate it. An old cider mill. Vague, dreamlike memories surfaced. My father, smelling of sawdust and autumn, talking about a place he was going to fix up one day. A place for us. I'd been a teenager, more interested in friends and boys than my father's quiet, broken-hearted schemes. I'd forgotten all about it. What do I do? I asked, the question sounding helpless even to my own ears. Legally? Nothing. It's yours, Ms. Albright said. Practically? You could let it go to a tax auction. You could try to find a buyer who wants the land, pay the arrears, and maybe walk away with a few $1,000s. Or you could go look at it. A ruin, a liability, a money pit in the middle of nowhere. It sounded just like my life, and yet, it was something. In a world where I had nothing, a ruin was a kind of foundation. Send me the details, I said, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years stirring in my chest. It wasn't hope, not yet, it was just curiosity. The bus ride to Northwood was a long, slow crawl out of the life I had known. For 8 hours, I watched the sprawling suburbs give way to flat, open farmland, which then slowly crumpled into rolling hills and dense, dark forests. The other passengers were a quiet collection of souls in transit. A young soldier in uniform, an elderly woman knitting, a student with headphones pressed to his ears. We were all running from something or to something. I wasn't sure which I was doing. The bus wheezed into the town of Northwood just as the sun was setting, painting the bruised purple clouds in shades of orange and pink. The town itself was little more than a single main street, flanked by brick buildings with faded paint and proud, old-fashioned storefronts. A hardware store, a diner, a post office. It was the kind of place that time seemed to flow around rather than through. I had arranged for a taxi, the town's only one, to take me the rest of the way. The driver was a man named Earl with a face like a road map and hands permanently stained with what looked like motor oil. He loaded my single suitcase into the trunk of his ancient sedan without a word. "The old Blackwood Mill?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble, as we pulled away from the bus stop. "Ain't nobody been out there in years. Not since old man Ward passed." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes lingering for a moment. "You must be his girl." I nodded. "Chloe." He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself mostly, had a lot of hard luck. We drove in silence after that, leaving the small pool of light from the town behind us and plunging into a landscape of deep shadows and winding country roads. The pavement gave way to gravel. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches clawing at the sky. Finally, Earl slowed the car and pointed through the dusty windshield. "There she is." Through a break in the trees, I saw it. The mill was a dark, hulking shape against the twilight sky, a great wounded beast of a building. Its roof sagged in the middle, and most of the windows were boarded up or broken. A faded sign, barely legible, hung crookedly over the main entrance, Blackwood Cider and Press. The property was choked with weeds and overgrown brush. A rusted-out pickup truck, the same one my father had driven for 20 years, sat near the entrance, its tires flat, its paint peeling. It looked like a monument to failure. Earl pulled up to a rickety gate and I got out. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, smelling of pine needles, damp earth, and something else. Something faintly sweet and fermented. The ghost of apples. "You sure about this, miss?" Earl asked, his gruff demeanor softening slightly. "I can take you back to the motel in town." I looked at the dark building, at the overgrown land, at the rusted truck. It was all I had left of my father. It was all I had left, period. "I'm sure," I said. "Thank you, Earl." He grunted, unloaded my suitcase, and drove away, his red taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving me utterly alone. The key Miss Albright had sent me was old and heavy, made of iron. It felt ancient in my hand. It took some jiggling, but the padlock on the gate groaned open. I dragged my suitcase through the overgrown yard to the main entrance of the mill. The big double doors were held shut by a thick wooden beam. It took all my strength to lift it out of its brackets. The doors swung inward with a deep, moaning creak, opening into a vast cathedral-like darkness. I fumbled for the flashlight on my phone, its thin beam cutting through the gloom. The inside was even more daunting than the outside. A huge, cavernous space stretched before me, filled with the silent, hulking shapes of machinery. A massive press dominated the center of the room, connected to a web of belts and gears that snaked up toward the high, raftered ceiling. Everything was covered in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs. The air was heavy with the smell of decay, rotting wood, rust, and the lingering, spectral sweetness of apples. I walked deeper into the space, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Light from the dying sun filtered through the grimy, broken windows, illuminating swirling motes of dust. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking place, a temple to a forgotten craft, a testament to a broken dream. To the side of the main pressing room, I found a small, glass-walled office. The door was unlocked. Inside, a simple wooden desk and chair sat facing a large window that looked out over the main floor. Papers were scattered across the desk, frozen in time, covered in the same uniform layer of dust. A calendar on the wall was turned to October 15 years ago. This was my father's sanctuary, his command center. I ran my hand over the back of the dusty chair where he would have sat. It was here, in this quiet, forgotten place, that I felt his presence more strongly than I had in years. I felt the weight of his hopes, his disappointments. On the desk, under a stack of yellowed invoices, was a framed photograph of my mother and me. I was about 5 years old, sitting on her lap, both of us laughing. My father had written on the back in his neat, careful script, "My 2 girls, my reason for everything, a wave of grief." So sharp and sudden it felt like a physical blow washed over me. I sank into the dusty chair and finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for my father, for the hard luck that had followed him his whole life. I cried for my mother, whose memory was a warm, fading glow. I cried for the woman I had been, the naive girl who had believed in forvers, and I cried for the woman I was now, alone in a derelict cider mill with nothing but ghosts for company. When the tears finally subsided, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The place was a wreck, it was a mess, but it was my mess. As I sat there in the growing darkness, my eyes scanned the small office. My gaze fell upon the floorboards beneath the desk. One of them looked different. The wood was slightly newer, the seam around it more pronounced. It reminded me of something my dad used to say when I was a kid, a little joke between us. "Every good workshop needs a secret spot," he'd tell me. "A place for treasures." I knelt down, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I used the end of the iron key to pry at the edge of the board. It resisted, then gave way with a small pop. Beneath it was a dark, rectangular cavity, and nestled inside that cavity was a heavy olive green, military-style ammunition box. It was locked with a simple combination lock. My mind raced. A combination. What would he have used? I tried my birthday. Nothing. His birthday. Nothing. My mother's birthday. The lock clicked open. My hands were shaking as I lifted the heavy lid. The inside was lined with oilcloth. There was no money, no treasure in the conventional sense. There was just a thick stack of envelopes, bound together with a faded red ribbon. They were all addressed to me in my father's familiar handwriting. The first one on top simply said, "For Chloe, when you need it most." I sat on the dusty floor of my father's forgotten office, the single beam of my phone's flashlight illuminating the pages in my lap, and I began to read. The world outside, with its legal battles and painful endings, dissolved. There was only the rustle of paper, the scent of old ink, and the silent voice of my father, speaking to me across the years. "My dearest Chloe," the first letter began. The date at the top was from the day after my wedding to Mark. If you are reading this, it means that life has taken a turn you did not expect. It means you are here, at the mill, and it means you are alone. I am so sorry for that. I hope you never have to read these words. I hope with all my heart that the man you married is the good man you believe him to be, that he loves you and protects you, and that you are living a happy life far from this broken-down old place. But I was a fool once, too. I trusted the wrong people. I believed in promises that turned out to be hollow. And love, my sweet girl, does not always make us wise. Sometimes it makes us blind. So I am writing this as a kind of insurance policy, a map back to yourself in case you ever get lost. I had to stop reading, my vision blurred by a fresh wave of this. He had seen it. All along, he had seen something in Mark that I had refused to see. The subtle control, the way he isolated me from my friends, the casual dismissal of my opinions. I had called it love. My father had recognized it for what it was. I wiped my eyes on the sleeve of my jacket and continued reading. The letters formed a hidden autobiography, a confession, a final accounting of a life I had only ever seen from the outside. He wrote about buying the mill with the money his own father had left him, his dream of building a family business, a legacy to pass on to me. He described the early years with my mother, the hope they had shared, the way she'd sketched out logos for the cider bottles and planted a small orchard of heirloom apple trees out back. Then the tone of the letters shifted. He wrote about my mother's illness, the years of hospital visits and crushing medical bills that had bled them dry. He'd sold off equipment, taken out second and third mortgages on our home, done everything he could to keep the dream of the mill alive while fighting to save the love of his life. After your mother was gone, he wrote, the world lost its color. The mill, which had been a place of hope, became a monument to everything I had lost. The bank took our house. We moved into that small apartment, and I took the job at the lumber yard. I know you felt I'd given up, that I'd let her down. The truth is, I was just trying to keep my head above water, Chloe. I was drowning. He explained that on my 18th birthday, with his own finances in ruins and creditors hounding him, he'd done the only thing he could think of to protect the last piece of their dream. He used the last of his savings to pay a lawyer to transfer the deed of the mill into my name. He'd registered it as a derelict, worthless asset to keep it off anyone's radar. It was a legal maneuver to shield it from his own debts. It was the only thing I had left to give you. Honey, a broken-down building and 10 acres of weeds. It wasn't much of a legacy, but it was yours, untouchable. A place to fall, if you ever needed one. The next series of letters, written over several years, detailed his observations of Mark. He wrote about their first meeting, how Mark had shaken his hand but hadn't looked him in the eye. He noted the expensive watch Mark wore, the way he talked about money, the subtle condescension in his voice when he spoke about my job. He sees you as a beautiful thing to own, not a person to cherish, one letter read. I tried to warn you in my clumsy way, but you were in love, and I knew if I pushed too hard he would find a way to cut me out of your life entirely. So I stayed quiet, I watched, and I prayed I was wrong, and I made sure this place was waiting for you, just in case. My whole body was shaking. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing my chest. My father hadn't been distant and disapproving. He had been terrified for me. He had been watching over me in the only way he knew how, creating a secret lifeboat while I happily sailed toward an iceberg. The final letter was dated just a week before his heart attack. His handwriting was a little shakier, the loops in his letters less certain. I'm tired, Chloe. I feel like I've been fighting a losing battle my whole life. But I've been coming out to the mill again, clearing some of the brush, patching the roof where I can. It feels good to work with my hands again. There's something here, honey. Something more than just old machines and bad memories. I've been doing some research, talking to some old-timers. The developer who's been sniffing around, a company called Mountain Ridge Properties. They don't want the land for condos like everyone thinks. They've been buying up old farms all over the county, paying bottom dollar. They're looking for something else. The old stories about this land are true. They called it Sweetwater Creek for a reason. I had a sample tested. It's a geological anomaly. There's a deep aquifer of incredibly pure water under this land, a spring. The flow rate is astronomical. It's worth more than the timber, more than the land itself, more than this old mill 100 times over. That's what they're after. They're trying to buy up the water rights for next to nothing. I've hidden the geological surveys and the water rights documentation. I didn't trust putting them in a bank. You're a smart girl, Chloe. You'll find them. The answer isn't in what's on the land, but what's under it. This place isn't a ruin. It's a well. Don't let them steal it from you. This is your birthright. This is your mother's legacy. It's the second chance I never had. Don't be afraid. You are stronger than you think. You are my daughter. All my love, Dad. I sat in the darkness for what felt like hours, the letters clutched in my hand. The entire narrative of my life had been rewritten. The shame I had felt about my father's financial failures was replaced by a profound, aching understanding of his sacrifice. The anger I felt toward Mark was now joined by a cold, hard fury. He hadn't just tried to ruin me. He had tried to erase a legacy he never even knew existed. And the fear, the helpless, suffocating fear that had been my constant companion for 2 years was finally blessedly gone. In its place, a single clear and powerful feeling began to grow. Resolve. The first light of dawn was filtering through the broken windows when I stood up. My legs were stiff. My body was exhausted, but my mind was clear. I knew what I had to do. The cellar. The answer was under the land. I found the cellar door behind a stack of rotting apple crates. It was a heavy wooden hatch set into the floor. It took all my weight to lift it. A set of steep stone steps led down into a cool darkness. The air smelled of earth and stone and time. I used my phone's light to navigate. The cellar was larger than I expected, a labyrinth of stone-walled rooms. Most were filled with empty barrels and old equipment. But in the farthest room, I saw what my father meant. One of the stone walls looked different. The mortar was newer. The stones not quite as settled as the others. It was a false wall. I pushed against it. It didn't budge. I ran my hands over the stones, searching for a loose one, a latch, anything, nothing. Frustrated, I leaned my shoulder against it and pushed with all my might. One of the stones shifted inward. It was a pivot. The entire section of wall swung open silently, revealing a small, dry, hidden chamber beyond. And inside, stacked neatly on a wooden shelf, were several thick binders and a small locked metal strongbox. The binders were filled with everything he had promised. Detailed geological surveys with highlighted cross-sections of the aquifer, hydrology reports, water purity analyses from a state lab, and the original notarized water rights deeds, filed decades ago and grandfathered in before the county changed its zoning laws. It was a treasure map and a legal fortress all in one. The strongbox held the key to the rusted pickup truck and a simple hand-drawn map of the property, with a single spot marked with an X near the creek bed. Underneath it was an envelope with $5,000 in cash and a note. For the back taxes and a hot meal. Start here. I walked out of the mill and into the morning light, blinking against the brightness. The world looked different. The overgrown weeds looked like a protective blanket. The sagging roof looked like a challenge. The rust on the old machines looked like the patina of history, not the color of decay. I had a choice. I could take the cash, sell the land and the water rights to the highest bidder, and walk away with more money than I had ever dreamed of. I could disappear, start a new life somewhere else, and leave all of this behind. It was the easy way out, the safe option. Or I could stay, I could fight. I could try to build what my father had envisioned. I could bring this place back to life. It was the harder path. It was uncertain, and it would be a struggle. It would mean taking on a faceless corporation, learning a business I knew nothing about, and pouring my own sweat and tears into this forgotten piece of land. I walked down to the creek, following my father's hand-drawn map. I found the spot marked with an X, a small clearing surrounded by birch trees. A flat, moss-covered stone was set into the ground. I knelt and placed my hand on it. The stone was cool, but I could feel a faint vibration from deep within the earth, the steady, powerful pulse of the spring. In that moment, the choice was clear. It wasn't even a choice. Selling this place would be like selling my father's soul. It would be like selling my own. This wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about honoring a hidden love so fierce and so patient it had reached across death to save me. It was about reclaiming not just my name, but my story. I was Chloe Ward, and I was home. Now I want to pause a second and speak directly to you. Have you ever discovered a secret from your past? Something a parent or a loved one kept hidden, that completely changed the way you saw your own life? It's a powerful, disorienting, and sometimes beautiful experience. If you've been through something like that, I want you to know you're not alone. Share a little bit about it in the comments below, if you feel comfortable. This community is a place for these kinds of stories, the ones that are hard to tell but important to hear. And if you're finding value in this, please consider subscribing. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get back to what happened next. The first call I made was to Ms. Albright. I explained everything. The letters, the hidden chamber, the surveys, the water rights. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in her sharp, legal mind. "Good heavens," she said finally, her usual professional composure completely gone. "Chloe, do you have any idea what you're sitting on?" "I'm starting to," I said, looking out at the 10 acres of wilderness that was mine. "What's my first move?" "Don't talk to anyone," she said, her voice snapping back into its familiar, authoritative tone. "Especially not Mountain Ridge Properties. They'll lowball you, they'll threaten you, they'll try to bury you in litigation. You need a specialist in water rights and environmental law. I know someone. He's expensive, but he's a shark. I'll make the call. In the meantime, get those documents somewhere safe. A bank vault, not on the property." Her second piece of advice was more practical. Pay the back taxes immediately. Pay them in person at the county clerk's office. Get a receipt. That removes their most immediate legal leverage. A tax auction would have been their easiest way to snatch the property. The $5,000 my father had left was just enough to cover the arrears, with a few hundred to spare. I spent the next week in a whirlwind of activity. I found a small motel room in Northwood to use as a base. I went to the county office and paid the taxes, the clerk barely looking up from her crossword puzzle as she stamped my receipt. I met with the lawyer Ms. Albright recommended, a fiery white-haired man named Ben Carter, who grinned like a predator when he saw the pristine, Century-old water rights deeds. They thought they were dealing with a ghost, he said, tapping the thick paper. They're about to find out the ghost has a daughter, and she has teeth. The first letter from Mountain Ridge Properties arrived a week later. It was a boilerplate offer, insultingly low, full of vague threats about zoning disputes and the cost of environmental cleanup. Ben Carter wrote a one-sentence reply. Our client is not interested in selling at this time. The battle had begun. While the lawyers exchanged carefully worded salvos, I focused on the mill itself. It was my responsibility now. I used the last of my father's cash to buy a new battery for the old pickup truck. I found Earl, the taxi driver, who also happened to be the town's best mechanic. He got the engine to turn over with a roar of protest that eventually settled into a grudging, rumbling idle. For the first time in 15 years, my father's truck was alive again. Driving it felt like shaking hands with his ghost. I started clearing the land myself. I bought a scythe, work gloves, and heavy boots from the local hardware store. I spent my days from sunrise to sunset cutting back the tangled brush, pulling up weeds and hauling away debris. It was backbreaking, exhausting work. My muscles ached in ways I didn't know were possible. My hands were covered in blisters and scratches. But with every swing of the scythe, I felt like I was cutting away the last remnants of my old life, clearing a space for something new to grow. The people in Northwood watched me with a quiet, reserved curiosity. I was a spectacle, the city girl in her fancy boots, trying to tame the old Blackwood place. But slowly, something shifted. Earl started leaving a thermos of hot coffee on the hood of the truck for me. In the mornings, the woman who ran the diner, a kindly, no-nonsense lady named Martha, would pack me a lunch of thick sandwiches and a slice of her famous apple pie. They didn't ask many questions. They just watched, and they helped in their own small ways. One afternoon, a man even older than Earl pulled up in a sputtering farm tractor. He introduced himself as George, a neighboring farmer. Your dad was a good man, he said, chewing on a piece of straw. He told me what he was planning to do here, bottling that sweet water. Good idea. He squinted at the sagging roof of the mill. You're gonna need help with that roof before the winter snows come. I've got some boys who could use the work. It wasn't charity, it was community. These were people who understood the land, who understood the value of hard work and a helping hand. I hired George's sons, and together, we spent a month patching the roof, replacing the broken windows, and reinforcing the main supports of the building. We couldn't fix everything, but we made it sound, we made it weatherproof. We stopped the decay. Inside, I began the slow process of cleaning. I swept away years of dust and grime. I scrubbed the floors. I carefully cleaned and oiled the old machinery. The giant apple press, a beautiful piece of cast iron engineering, slowly came back to life under my hands, its metal gleaming in the afternoon light. It was during this time that the inevitable happened. Word got back to Mark. I received a letter from his lawyer. It was full of outrage and accusations. He claimed I had fraudulently hidden an asset during the divorce proceedings. He was petitioning the court to reopen the settlement. He wanted half. I forwarded the letter to Miss Albright. Her response was swift and brutal. She sent them a copy of the deed, clearly showing the property had been gifted to me a decade before I'd even met Mark. She sent them a copy of the initial asset declaration where the property, valued at $0, had been listed in plain sight for them to see. Their failure to do their due diligence was not my fraud. He's got no legal standing, she told me over the phone. It's a scare tactic. He's a bully, Chloe. He's trying to see if you'll flinch. I didn't flinch. I wrote a check to Miss Albright from the small business loan I'd managed to secure against the property's new, much higher appraisal, and I told her to fight him with everything she had. I hung up the phone and went back to work on the mill. He no longer had any power over me. He was just noise from a life I'd already left behind. The first snows of winter arrived, blanketing the land in a thick layer of white. The world went quiet. The lawyers continued their work. The town settled in for the cold months, and I focused on the final piece of my father's plan. The spring. With the help of a local well driller, we tapped the aquifer. The moment the drill broke through the final layer of rock and the clear, cold water came rushing to the surface was a moment of pure magic. It felt like the land itself was giving its blessing. I used the rest of my loan to purchase modern bottling equipment. It was a small-scale operation, but it was a start. I set it up in the cavernous main room of the mill, the new stainless steel tanks standing beside the old, lovingly restored cider press. A bridge between the past and the future. I spent hours designing a label. I used my mother's old sketches as inspiration. The final design was simple, a pen and ink drawing of the old mill, with the words Sweetwater Creek Spring Co. underneath. and in small letters at the bottom, "In memory of Robert and Eleanor Ward." The first bottle of Sweetwater came off the line in early spring, just as the snow was beginning to melt and the first green shoots were pushing their way through the damp earth. I held it up to the light. It was just water, but it was also a promise kept, a legacy honored, a future I had built with my own 2 hands. It was my second chance. Clear and pure and real. Months have turned into a year. The business is growing slowly but steadily. We're in a few local stores now, and a distributor in the city has started placing larger orders. Mountain Ridge Properties, after a long and expensive legal battle, finally gave up and turned their attention to other, easier targets. Mark's petition to reopen the divorce was dismissed by the court. I haven't heard from him since. I live in a small apartment I built in the loft of the mill, overlooking the main floor. Every morning, I wake up to the sight of the sun streaming through the high windows, illuminating the space where my father's dream is humming back to life. It's not an easy life. It's a life of hard work, long hours, and constant challenges. But it's a life that is fundamentally, unequivocally mine. I often think about the nature of inheritance. We think of it as money, or property, or things. But my father left me something far more valuable. He left me a path back to myself. He left me the knowledge that a place that looks like a ruin can actually be a foundation. That what is broken can be mended. That what is lost can in some way be found again. This old mill isn't just a building. It's a testament to a father's quiet, stubborn love. And it's my home. It's the place that didn't just give me shelter, but gave me back my own strength. And that's a truth worth more than all the water in the world. I want to end by saying thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. The lesson I take from all of this is that our deepest roots are often hidden, and sometimes we have to go digging through the ruins of our past to find the source of our greatest strength. Your past doesn't define you, but it can be the wellspring of your future if you have the courage to face it. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to find strength in a place of loss, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. My goal is to create a space where stories like ours can be shared and heard, and please share your own story in the comments. I read every single one. Tell me about the cider mill in your life, the unexpected inheritance, the hidden strength, the second chance you didn't see coming, because your story matters. And together, in this community, we can remind each other that no matter how devastating the ending, it's never too late for a new beginning.